Meanwhile, the Israeli Minister of Defense announced that the country had attacked Iran and declared a state of emergency. Israel activates national sirens, closes schools. Related developments, the military stated that air raid sirens were activated as a proactive warning measure to prepare for the possibility of missiles being launched toward Israel. The Israeli side emphasized this was a precautionary move to ensure public readiness in case of an emergency. According to Reuters, the Israeli military has announced that schools nationwide will be closed, and authorities have advised people to work from home. Additionally, large public gatherings throughout Israel have been banned. Israeli authorities have closed airspace and canceled all civilian flights. The Israeli Ministry of Transportation advised Israeli citizens abroad to follow the directives and recommendations of the National Security Council. The announcement stated, "As soon as the security situation permits, airspace will be reopened. Flights to and from Israel will resume. An announcement will be made 24 hours before flights resume." U.S.-Israeli scenario plans for attacking Iran. Navy Rear Admiral Brad Cooper, head of U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, and in charge of U.S. forces in the Middle East, reportedly briefed President Donald Trump on potential military scenarios against Iran. ABC News, citing sources familiar with the matter, said that General Dan Ken, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff and top military advisor to Mr. Trump, also attended the discussion. In recent days, some U.S. Republican senators have secretly supported the option of Israel proactively attacking Iran before the U.S. initiates military action. However, it is unclear whether this plan has been approved by Mr. Trump. Recent sociological studies indicate that American society has limited willingness to support a large-scale military campaign without a direct cause. At the same time, sources suggest that the most viable option for the next developments remains a coordinated operation between the U.S. and Israel. White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly, answering reporters' questions, emphasized that the media can speculate, but the final decision rests entirely with the president. Previously, some analysts suggested that letting Israel strike first could help Republican senators reduce political pressure in an election year when Mr. Trump campaigned on a promise to end conflicts around the world. If Israel attacks and Iran retaliates, the U.S. could argue that intervention is to protect an ally. However, this strategy has potential risks. Observers warn that if the campaign escalates and the U.S. suffers losses, the political consequences will be significant. According to ABC News sources, one of the options being considered is to conduct limited strikes against Iranian ballistic missile launchers and nuclear facilities to pressure Tehran into concessions. Additionally, a large-scale campaign lasting several weeks, targeting multiple objectives, is also under consideration. The scenario of Israel initiating the attack is not only to exert diplomatic pressure, but also to further weaken Iran's air defense system, creating conditions for a more extensive campaign. However, analysts warn that such a campaign would be very risky and costly. One of the biggest concerns is the risk of Iran retaliating against the 35,000 to 40,000 U.S. troops stationed in the region. Democratic Senator Mark Wagner, leader of the Democratic Party at the Senate Intelligence Committee, stated that this is a particularly critical moment for the Middle East and the United States. An Iranian official said Tehran is preparing to retaliate after Israel's latest attack, while warning that its response will crush the opponent. Immediately the time Iranian the situation if the in is for Netanyahu the Israel according notably Amos, however, islands Washington U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened to take action if an agreement is not reached. In addition, Trump had, when asked it. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran remain high after the latest round of nuclear negotiations in Geneva failed to make a breakthrough as U.S. forces gather in the Middle East. Mr. Trump threatened military action if Iran does not agree to a comprehensive agreement to limit its nuclear program. Meanwhile, Iran insists they have the right to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes and deny seeking nuclear weapons. In related developments, the U.S. has spent heavily when deploying a large military force to the Gulf region to put pressure on Iran over the past time. It is known that this reinforcement process is very significant. The U.S. Air Force deployed in the Middle East is now equivalent to or even exceeds the level before the war in Iraq in 2003. This force includes 2 carrier strike groups, with the first one led by the USS Abraham Lincoln, which usually operates in the Arabian Sea. In recent days, this force has been reinforced by another group led by the Geranford. The ship participated in the operation to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro last month. This deployment is very expensive. According to the Center for a New American Security, CNAS, the cost of operating a carrier strike group is about $65 million per day. This brings the total cost of the presence of 2 aircraft carriers in Gulf 34 to about $13 million per day. The daily cost of warships and additional equipment constituting President Donald Trump's Middle East fleet further increases this number. In other words, in the past month alone, Maintaining a standby force in the South Gulf 34 has cost the U.S. military about $200 million. If the negotiations continue to drag on, the total cost for the current increased presence could reach or exceed $500 million by mid or late March. U.S. issues strong warning to Iran, allows embassy staff in Israel to leave. Recently, the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has sent a mixed signal between military threats and leaving the door open for dialogue with Iran, while the U.S. Congress has requested to be consulted before any decision to use force. The message of Mr. Trump's administration about Iran is revealing many conflicting signals. While the U.S. president appears to be leaning towards the possibility of launching limited strikes, the White House has been sending mixed messages, alternating between tough rhetoric and leaving the door open for dialogue with Iran. This inconsistency undermines the rationale for military intervention. Conversely, the Democratic opposition has criticized the ambiguity of President Trump's strategic objectives, demanding that Congress be consulted before any decision is made that could draw the United States into a conflict. President Trump has stated that he prioritizes a diplomatic solution, but also affirmed his readiness to order airstrikes should negotiations fail. This stance is supported by the significant increase in U.S. military presence in the Middle East. In a related development, the U.S. informed some embassy staff in Israel that they could leave the country, urging those who wish to depart to do so immediately amid growing concerns about a potential U.S. strike on Iran, which has heightened anxiety in the region. The U.S. embassy in Israel also advised individuals planning to leave the country to book flights promptly, anticipating a surge in demand following the embassy's announcement. In a separate public statement, the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem confirmed that non-essential government employees and their family members were authorized to leave Israel due to security risks, although specific details were not provided. This action falls short of a mandatory evacuation order, as was the case for some personnel at the U.S. embassy in Kurdistan. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department announced that Secretary of State Marco Rubio would travel to Israel on July 10th to discuss a range of regional priorities, including the issue of Iran. This development follows the latest round of talks between Washington and Tehran regarding Iran's nuclear program, which failed to achieve a significant breakthrough. President Trump is currently overseeing a major military buildup in the Middle East, described as the largest of its kind in decades. Speaking to reporters, President Trump reiterated his warning that Iran must not possess nuclear weapons. He stated that no final decision has been made regarding military action, emphasizing that while he does not want to use force, it is sometimes necessary. Trump also expressed his dissatisfaction with the negotiations with Iran, suggesting that Tehran is not responsive to U.S. demands. He also indicated that U.S. officials would hold further discussions later that day. Vice President Jerry Van met with Omani Foreign Minister Bod al-Busidi in Washington. Oman has served as a mediator in nuclear talks in Geneva. Following the meeting, al-Busidi stated that he had updated the U.S. on the progress of the negotiations and expressed hope for decisive progress in the coming days, asserting that peace is within reach. Recently, Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein and his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araqi held a phone conversation, emphasizing that negotiations are the most appropriate way to address outstanding issues related to the current tensions in the Middle East. According to a statement from the Iraqi Foreign Ministry, Araqi updated Iraq on the latest developments in the nuclear talks between Iran and the U.S. in Geneva, Switzerland, including the progress made and the schedule for upcoming technical meetings. Both sides also emphasized the need to prevent escalation and war in the region while maintaining security and stability in the Middle East. Regarding the negotiation process, Omani Foreign Minister Bod al-Busidi, whose country serves as an intermediary, stated that during the third round of consultations between Iran and the U.S. in Geneva, an agreement was reached for Iran to relinquish its entire stock of enriched uranium at Washington's request. According to him, the existing uranium will be diluted to the lowest possible level, converted into fuel, and rendered irreversible. Busidi also noted that Iran is willing to consider allowing U.S. inspectors access to its territory to monitor compliance with a potential nuclear agreement, suggesting that this could be a much better deal than the previous Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. However, President Trump stated that Washington is facing a major decision regarding Iran, expressing dissatisfaction with the way Iran is conducting the negotiations. In a related development, the U.S. is increasingly identifying Iran as a state sponsor of wrongful detentions, a first-of-its-kind move based on a new list that could pave the way for additional restrictions. In a statement, Secretary of State Rubio called on Tehran to end its hostage-taking practices and release all unjustly detained American citizens, emphasizing that this is a condition for considering the lifting of the designation and related measures. Secretary Rubio also indicated that without progress, Washington may decide to prohibit the use of U.S. passports for travel to Iran. The U.S. State Department simultaneously advised citizens not to travel to Iran for any reason and urged those currently in the country to leave immediately. Dungmin warned of a prolonged conflict if the U.S. attacks Iran. The Qaeda Hezbollah armed group in Iraq, backed by Iran, recently declared that any attack on Iran would directly threaten their interests and could ignite a large-scale confrontation in the region. In a recent statement, the group called on its fighters to prepare for a prolonged war of attrition if the U.S. attacks Tehran, warning that Washington would suffer heavy losses if it opens another front in the Middle East conflict. The statement was issued after the third round of indirect nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran in Geneva concluded without a breakthrough, as Washington continues to increase the deployment of warships and aircraft to the region. The Qaeda Hezbollah's Operations Command emphasized that in light of the U.S. threats and military buildup, which indicate a serious risk of escalation, preparations must be made for a prolonged war of attrition that exceeds the calculations of the U.S. administration. Hezbollah's statement clarified that if the U.S. ignites war in the region, they will face enormous losses that cannot be controlled or compensated. An Iraqi faction commander stated that they view Iran as a strategic asset for their interests and believe that any attack on Tehran directly threatens them. During the 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran in 2025, Iraqi armed groups affiliated with Tehran did not directly participate. However, the commander stated that this time they may be less restrained, especially if Washington's objective is to attack in order to overthrow the Iranian government. For much of the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria fired rockets and drones at U.S. bases in the region. A Hezbollah representative in Lebanon said that the group would not react strongly to limited U.S. attacks on Iran, but would consider any action targeting Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei as crossing a red line. The U.S. is now believed to have amassed its largest military force in the Middle East since before the 2003 Iraq War. President Trump has repeatedly emphasized that Iran must curtail its uranium enrichment and missile development programs. Tehran maintains that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes and states that it will not accept coercive demands. Trump has stated that he prioritizes a diplomatic solution, but has also repeatedly warned that he will use military force if Iran does not accept a new agreement. Following the negotiations in Geneva, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Ari said that the parties had made very good progress, but emphasized that Washington needs to abandon excessive demands if it wants to reach a new nuclear agreement. According to him, further negotiations will take place with technical meetings in Vienna, Austria, in the coming days. Putin is pushing for UAV reform, paving the way for a large-scale autonomous strategy. The Russian government, with the participation of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, must determine by the end of April 2026 the criteria for assessing the success of drone pilots under a special legal mechanism. President Putin issued this directive following a related meeting in January 2026, and the list of tasks has been posted on the Kremlin website. The cabinet is required to consider defining standards for the pilot deployment in the field of autonomous systems under the experimental legal mechanism to be considered successful, thereby providing the basis for the rapid introduction of autonomous systems in the sectors of the economy. In addition, the government will consider establishing the necessary experimental legal mechanisms for the use of ground-based autonomous systems on public roads and sidewalks. This applies to delivery and freight operations. This is part of Putin's directive to implement measures to accelerate the introduction of autonomous systems in many sectors of the Russian economy. Medvedev recently told servicemen during a visit to a manned aviation unit that Russia has become a leader in the field of unmanned systems. Although this area was previously not considered a strength of the defense industry, he added that the UAV industry was formed almost from scratch by enthusiasts from the very beginning of the military operation, when there was almost no discussion of UAVs at the time. Medvedev believes that under the current agreement, the Russian side is not announcing the results of the ongoing negotiation process to resolve the situation in Ukraine. Russia has stated its position in the negotiations, including issues of territory and parameters related to the demilitarization of Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian side has not yet responded. The fortress of Pop Rope is on fire as Ukraine faces a critical turning point. According to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, Russian forces appear to have taken control of the city of Pokrovsk in Ukraine's Donetsk province. Analysts say there has been no doubt that Ukrainian forces have been operating in the town since the end of May 2022. This suggests that Russian troops may have completed their control of the area in recent weeks. ISW notes that Russian forces have not been able to take advantage of the capture of Pop to achieve significant operational advances. The report assesses that full control of PO does not mean that Russia will soon take the rest of Donetsk province. However, recent Russian advances around the towns of Pogrop and Minarat, 100 kilometers northeast of Hulia, help consolidate Russian control there. At the same time, the path of Russian forces towards Zaporizhzhia is largely open because Ukraine lacks major fortifications. Meanwhile, every direction of Russia's offensive towards Kramatorsk is heavily defended. Therefore, Ukraine's choice to trade some areas north of BR and Minarat for a counteroffensive around Hulop is considered reasonable in the context of Ukraine's severe shortage of forces to stretch over a front line of more than 1,000 km. However, ISW says that Russia's advances beyond Pokrop remain limited. The city does not open up major avenues of attack for further operations, and surrounding residential areas such as Rachin remain under Ukrainian control. Analysts assess that Russia's slow and costly offensive has not created immediate conditions to seize heavily fortified positions in northern Donetsk province, also known as the Fortress Belt. The report emphasizes that although POP is operationally important as a logistics hub, controlling the city is unlikely to translate into a broader strategic advantage for Russia in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine is focusing its efforts on a general offensive against Zaporizhzhia, where the front is exploding violently. Ukrainian armed forces have retaken 300 kilometers of territory in the southern direction as part of a counteroffensive to dislodge Russian soldiers from entrenched positions. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in an interview with the French news agency Le Jonge FP. Earlier in February, a surprise occurred when the Ukrainian army used 50,000 elite soldiers to launch a fierce counterattack across the Zaporizhzhia front. This operation, personally directed by General Alexander Sevsky, commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces AFU, came as a surprise as the KF forces abandoned the traditional breakthrough model. Instead, they counterattacked simultaneously in 6 directions spanning a 200-kilometer front, using 7 regiments and 3 shock brigades. In 72 hours, the Ukrainian army claimed to have regained more than 300 kilometers of territory, forcing the Vostok and Dnipro operational groups of the Russian army RFF to retreat into defense. The Russian channel Ryba also acknowledged that the situation on the western flank of Zaporizhzhia had deteriorated significantly. Notably, the successes mentioned above were also due to the weakening of the communication systems that the Russian army is using. It should be remembered that SpaceX has restricted the use of Starlink satellite internet services in Ukraine to unauthorized users. Currently, to operate fully, the owner must add the terminal to the whitelist and register it officially. Meanwhile, officially, Russia prohibits the use and registration of this equipment on its territory, and they have not yet reacted to the new changes made by SpaceX. Through the above event, it is easy to see the enormous role of Starlink in the modern battlefield, emphasizing the dual-use nature of satellites in low Earth orbit. However, General SSKI's counteroffensive is still considered bold, focusing on exploiting the weaknesses of long defense lines and the scattered forces of the Russian army, creating many weaknesses and exerting comprehensive pressure. The northeast direction, a Ukrainian mechanized infantry brigade secretly crossed the Vola River, infiltrated the Soloske line, directly threatening Russia's rear supply center. In the northern direction, the 095th Road Assault Brigade and the 425th AFU Assault Regiment used coordinated strangulation tactics to penetrate the defense line of the 69th Brigade of the VTK RFF, while in the northwest direction, the 92nd Assault Brigade and the 082nd AFU Road Assault Brigade carried out an armored hunting operation using 3-dimensional attack tactics, driving back the 5th RFA Tank Brigade. As for the southwestern flank, this was identified as the main direction of attack with a rapid incursion 20 kilometers wide, where the KF force broke through near Stiak and engaged directly with the 19th RFA Motorized Infantry Division. Ukraine is facing fierce airstrikes as a key city is approached. In a statement on social network Telegram, Deputy Prime Minister in charge of reconstruction as Minister of Community and Territory Development of Ukraine, Oleksiy Kulyba, announced that Russian troops had launched an air attack on coastal infrastructure in the southern province of Odessa. The Ukrainian news agency Forum quoted a post by Mr. Kulyba saying, "We recorded damage to many warehouses, factories, and port equipment. Fires broke out in several areas, including food containers." According to preliminary information, the attack did not cause any casualties. Firefighters were present and extinguished the flames. The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister added that since the beginning of the conflict, Russian troops have damaged nearly 700 of Ukraine's seaport infrastructures and damaged or destroyed 150 civilian ships. Mr. Kulyba said that despite the conflict, the Ukrainian maritime corridor is still operating. More than 176 million tons of goods have been shipped, including more than 150 million tons of grain. Despite the attacks, we are still fully fulfilling our food security guarantees. Meanwhile, Major Horhory Shapovan, spokesperson for the Eastern Operations Strategic Group of Ukraine, recently stated that Russian forces are increasing pressure on the Platonica, Bondani, and Privila areas on the Slovian and Gramatox fronts in the Donetsk province. Mr. Pavan emphasized that Ukrainian forces are still in control of the situation. Until recently, Russian authorities announced that their forces had approached the strategic city of Gramatox in eastern Ukraine. Statement from the Russian military stated that our estimate shows that the distance from some areas under Russian control to the city of Gramatox in Donetsk, Ukraine is less than 15 kilometers. Many positions of the Ukrainian defense forces in the city are within range of our artillery and missile fire, according to an updated map on February 26 from the Ukrainian conflict tracking page state. Russia is maintaining at least 5 attacks within 10 kilometers of the city of Gramatox in 2 directions, east and southeast. Ukraine's steel shield is transforming in front of more than 100,000 Russian UAV missiles. The Ukrainian battlefield is still mired in attrition UAV and long-range shelling attacks, while casualties continue to increase. Ukrainian circles describe the past winter as the harshest period since the fighting broke out. Russia has exponentially increased attacks on Ukraine's energy system, causing widespread power outages in Kiev, where many areas are only supplied with electricity for a few hours each day in freezing weather. According to Forbes, given the frequency of Russian firepower in recent years, Ukraine has been trying to develop an advanced and constantly changing shield, but there are still gaps to overcome. Russia's firepower advantage is undeniable. In addition to a large number of short-range bombs near the front lines, Russia has attacked Ukrainian targets with approximately 13,771 missiles and 88,218 attack UAVs. The current attacks are larger in scale and more accurate than anything previously seen. In the face of increasing pressure, Ukraine has developed this multi-layered defense shield, which includes a network of interconnected radars and sensors, along with various interceptors to knock down the increasing number of missiles and UAVs. The longest range are the Patriot systems provided by the US and the S-300 from the Soviet era. Patriot is the only system proven to be able to intercept ballistic missiles. Here's the translation and adaptation of the provided text, aiming for clarity in a slightly expanded style. For medium-range defense, systems like the NASAMS and IRIS-T with ranges under 80 kilometers are instrumental, accounting for the majority of cruise missile interceptions. Shorter-range systems, covering just a few kilometers, include man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, the British-supplied Raven system, and other similar complexes. At close range, Germany's JP air defense gun, featuring twin 35mm automatic cannons, proves effective. These are supplemented by Soviet-era 23mm guns and a variety of heavy machine guns, including even the Maxim guns dating back to 1910, which can be used to target Shahed drones by mobile fire teams. More recently, Ukraine has also begun deploying the Sky Sentinel robotic turret. This is a cost-effective system guided by radar and AI-integrated cameras, capable of round-the-clock surveillance and precise responses. Ground forces also receive support from the Air Force, including F-16s, helicopters, and light aircraft that pursue and eliminate threats with aerial gunfire. Recent reports mention the use of An-28 twin-propeller transport aircraft, equipped with night vision-equipped gunners and M136 rotary machine guns, specifically for shooting down UAVs. These aircraft have allegedly taken down 158 targets. However, perhaps the most significant success in countering UAVs has been the rapid development and deployment of tens of thousands of small interceptor UAVs, such as the Will Hornet Sting. Despite these efforts, many Russian attacks still penetrate Ukraine's defenses. The scale of these assaults continues to grow, and Russia is constantly changing tactics to overwhelm the defenders. Ukraine acknowledges that 80% of its territory lacks protection from systems capable of intercepting ballistic missiles due to limited aid from the West. These factors create significant vulnerabilities that Ukraine is striving to address. Elon Musk is creating a major turning point in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A mid-month analysis by AFP, drawing on data from the U.S.-based Institute for the Study of War, ISW, indicated that Ukrainian forces had reclaimed 91 square kilometers of territory during a counteroffensive between the 11th and 15th, including 86 square kilometers in the area approximately 80 kilometers east of Zaporizhzhia. According to AFP, this represents the largest area Ukraine has recovered in such a short period since the counteroffensive in June 2023. The ISW suggests that this progress may be attributed to the disruption of Russian forces' access to Starlink satellite internet services. The ISW reported that Russian military bloggers believe the loss of Starlink connectivity is causing command and communication problems on the battlefield. SpaceX, owned by Elon Musk, began requiring authentication of Starlink terminals from the 4th of the month. Only approved and whitelisted devices by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense were able to continue operating. Russian soldiers almost immediately complained that Cosmos and Shinka, their codenames for Starlink and Telegram, were no longer working. This insider cited intercepted radio communications from Ukrainian forces indicating the same. "It's bad they cut off all the Starlink transceivers," one Russian soldier is heard saying. Another confirmed, "The connection is completely lost. We can't transmit images anymore." Air reconnaissance from Ukraine's Berevy Brigade, callsign Mustang, noted that the frequency of Russian mortar and artillery fire had dropped significantly on the very first day that SpaceX began requiring Starlink authentication. The number of drone attacks also decreased considerably. Ukrainian military commanders reported that the effectiveness of Russian UAV operations had been sharply reduced, creating opportunities for Ukraine to regain the initiative in multiple combat zones. Commander of the 3rd Ukrainian Corps, Andrei Besky, asserted that the loss of Starlink access had a tremendous impact on Moscow's combat capabilities. He emphasized that the effectiveness of Russian attacks had decreased by 20% to 40% in recent weeks, particularly in UAV operations. The Ukrainian commander suggested Russia could regain some of its capabilities in the next 1 to 2 months via other satellite systems. However, he believed that restoring their prior level of effectiveness in the near future, perhaps even for the next 3 to 5 years, would be difficult. The Starlink system, developed by Elon Musk's SpaceX, serves as the backbone for battlefield communications. According to AFP, Havana officials stated they were in contact with Washington after Cuban border guards fired on a speedboat registered in the United States and Caribbean waters near the island nation on the 25th of the month. Havana alleged that 10 armed Cuban Americans on the vessel illegally entered Cuban waters and opened fire on Cuban soldiers. Cuba was forced to return fire, resulting in the deaths of 4 people and injuries to 6 others who are currently being held in Cuba. A U.S. official stated that at least 2 people on board were U.S. citizens, one of whom was killed and one injured. The remaining individuals may be permanent residents of the United States. The boat's owner reported that an employee stole the vessel and he only found out when reporters contacted him, the official said. Ryan Novosti commented, "What is striking is the courage of the Cubans. The waters around their island are thick with U.S. warships, and the skies are patrolled by American fighter jets." Washington officially maintains a blockade of Cuba, prohibiting anyone from supplying oil and petroleum products to the island nation. However, the Cubans are still brave enough to risk their lives to defend their maritime borders. The fate of Cuba today seems to hang by a thread. However, it should be remembered that the island of freedom has overcome challenges no less serious. The guiding principle of Cuban policy for the White House is a secret memorandum from Lester Mallory, U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. He wrote in 1960 that most Cubans support leader Fidel Castro. The only way to take away that support is to create disappointment and discontent through economic hardship. It is necessary to deprive Cuba of money and resources, cut financial reserves and wages, and cause hunger, despair, and overthrow the government. This genocidal policy, according to the article, has been consistently implemented by the United States. The Cubans understand that if they show weakness, the descendants of the former owners who emigrated to Florida will return in a rage, seize everything, plunder to the end, and even carry out massacres. Therefore, the U.S. policy of pressure, which is often condemned by the United Nations, has so far not achieved its goal. There is another secret to the unsinkability of the island of freedom. Many nations and governments around the world consider Cuba to be a bulwark of resistance against global hegemony. Many friends and neighbors cannot openly support Cuba. However, in the gray area, every effort is made to help Cuba survive and thrive. Cuba is seen as an unsinkable aircraft carrier of freedom right on the border of the United States. Citizens inspire the world with their resilience and heroism. It was Cuban soldiers who fell while trying to protect President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Havana said goodbye to them as national heroes. With such people, Cuba will overcome all challenges and friends will help this country as usual. The U.S. blacklists Iran. China takes an unbelievable action right now. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that Iran would be designated as a state sponsor of wrongful detentions, demanding that it stop taking hostages and release all Americans unjustly detained in the country. These are steps that can help end decisions and related actions, Rubio added. Americans should not travel to Iran for any reason. We reiterate our call for U.S. citizens currently in Iran to leave immediately. Rubio stated that Washington could order a ban on citizens using U.S. passports to travel to Iran if Tehran does not take steps to remedy the situation. The U.S. currently only prohibits citizens from traveling to one country, North Korea. Many Iranian Americans regularly travel to Iran, even though the two countries have not maintained diplomatic relations since 1980. Previously, in September 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order establishing a blacklist of countries that wrongfully detain people, similar to the list of state sponsors of terrorism. Iran became the first country to be added to the new blacklist. In recent years, Tehran has arrested several Americans, often dual nationals whom the Iranian government considers citizens. Washington's labeling of Iran as a state sponsor of unlawful detentions has fueled speculation that the move may be intended to bolster public opinion ahead of a potential escalation of tensions. The Pentagon has deployed 2 carrier strike groups and additional air assets to the region in what officials describe as a show of force. Reportedly, more than 150 aircraft and about 1/3 of the fleet are now concentrated near Iran. Vice President Givens sought to reassure the American public that any potential strike would not lead to another protracted conflict in the Middle East. He added that a multi-year war was unlikely and cautioned against what he called memorizing lessons from past interventions. However, President Donald Trump recently acknowledged that he faces a difficult choice regarding how to proceed with relations with Iran after diplomatic efforts have not been as effective as desired. "We have to make a big decision, a tough decision," Trump told a crowd in Corpus Christi, Texas, where he was promoting his energy agenda. Trump said the decision was not easy and that Iran has long engaged in harmful behavior. Meanwhile, China has advised its citizens to avoid traveling to Iran and to evacuate from the Middle Eastern country as tensions escalate between Washington and Tehran. Specifically, the Consular Department of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced on its WeChat account that given the current security situation in Iran, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Chinese representatives in Iran advised Chinese citizens not to travel to Iran for the time being. Those who are in Iran should strengthen safety measures and leave the country as soon as possible. According to the agency, Iran has recently faced a clearly increasing security risk from outside, and many countries have advised their citizens to leave the Islamic nation. Beijing will provide assistance to Chinese citizens traveling by commercial flights or by land. China publicly criticized the U.S.'s trilateral nuclear disarmament initiative. China has stated that the U.S.'s request for it to join trilateral nuclear disarmament talks with the U.S. and Russia is unfair and unfeasible. Beijing's response followed recent statements by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio calling on China to participate in a nuclear arms control agreement with the U.S. and Russia. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning emphasized that China's nuclear strength is not in the same class as that of the U.S. and Russia at this stage, and that it is unfair, unreasonable, and unfeasible to ask China to participate in the so-called trilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations between China, the U.S., and Russia. Previously, speaking to reporters on the sidelines of a meeting of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, in the island nation of St. Kitts and Nevis, Rubio stated that in the 21st century, a real arms control agreement would require China's participation. He also acknowledged that the size of China's nuclear arsenal is currently significantly smaller than that of the U.S. and Russia, but argued that this is irrelevant. According to him, Beijing has the capacity and is on track to close the gap. Mao Ning noted that China has repeatedly clarified its position on this issue. As a country with a huge nuclear arsenal, the United States needs to assume special and primary responsibility for vigorously promoting nuclear disarmament. Earlier, speaking at a high-level meeting on disarmament in Geneva earlier this week, Shen Jian, China's ambassador for disarmament affairs, said that China firmly supports the purposes and objectives of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. U.S. allegations that China is conducting nuclear tests are completely unfounded and are a pretext fabricated to justify its potential resumption of nuclear tests. The New START Treaty, the last bilateral nuclear arms control agreement between Washington and Moscow, expired on the 20th of the month. Commenting on the possibility of building a follow-up treaty to New START, the Chinese delegation on disarmament to Geneva said that the United States, as the country with the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, needs to assume special and primary responsibility in the disarmament process. The delegation also said that there are currently no negotiations between Beijing and Washington on this issue. The Chinese company Midge Vision recently released satellite images showing 11 U.S. F-22 stealth fighters parked at a parking lot at the Upta Air Force Base in southern Israel. The move occurred less than 24 hours after Israeli media reported that a squadron of F-22s had been deployed to the country but did not specify the location. According to sources from Giz of Israel, this is part of Washington's plan to increase its large-scale military presence in the Middle East in preparation for scenarios of attacking Iran. Flight tracking data shows that the squadron departed from the Royal Air Force's Leon Head Air Force Base in England after a week-long stopover due to technical issues related to refueling aircraft. Notably, of the 12 aircraft that took off, one had to return to its base in England due to a technical fault. while the remaining 11 completed their deployment in the Middle East. The Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor is the U.S.'s most modern fifth-generation stealth fighter, possessing a perfect combination of stealth technology and super maneuverability in air combat. The deployment of this squadron directly to Israeli bases to perform combat missions instead of regular exercises is considered by observers to be an extremely rare move. In addition, another photo released on the same day showed a Patriot air defense position near the Upta base, including a command post, generator, support vehicle, and 3 launchers. It is likely that this is a U.S. force, as the Israeli military has long retired the Patriot system. Previously, on the 10th of the month, the Chinese satellite photographed 16 KC-135 tankers, 1 RC-135 electronic reconnaissance aircraft, and 2 C-17 transport aircraft at An-Yodesit. 10 days later, there were 7 KC-135 tankers, 1 RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft, and 3 C-130 transport aircraft at this base. The number of U.S. aircraft at NUDF has decreased significantly over the past 2 weeks, apparently in an effort to evacuate equipment and personnel in case of an Iranian retaliatory attack. At least 16 F-16 fighters, 3 KC-135 tankers, 2 P-8A maritime patrol aircraft, 2 C-130J transport aircraft, 3 C-17 transport aircraft, and 1 C-5M heavy transport aircraft are appearing on the outdoor parking lot. It is unclear whether there are B-2 stealth bombers in the clamshell-shaped shelters. The U.S., Russia, and China have urgently spoken out about the Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Allison Hooker wrote on social media after a meeting with her Pakistani counterpart, "We continue to monitor the situation closely and express our support for Pakistan's right to self-defense against attacks from the Taliban." Hooker also sent U.S. condolences to Pakistani Foreign Minister Balak over casualties in the recent outbreak of conflict, but did not call for an end to hostilities. The U.S. State Department the same day accused the Taliban of not complying with its counterterrorism commitments, adding that terrorist groups have used Afghanistan as a launching pad to carry out brutal attacks. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump said he has a very good relationship with Pakistan and praised the country's leadership as tensions between Islamabad and Kabul escalated. In Iran, sharing the same view, Russia called on the warring parties to immediately end cross-border attacks and resolve disputes through diplomatic means. Meanwhile, given the speaking, she emphasized China has been mediating the conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan through private channels and is willing to continue to play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation and improving relations between the two countries. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, as well as the Chinese embassies in Pakistan and Afghanistan, are working with relevant parties on this issue. At the same time, China requests both countries to ensure the safety of Chinese personnel, projects, and institutions in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Currently, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi affirmed Iran's readiness to support all efforts to facilitate dialogue, enhance understanding, and promote cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Iran shares a border with both countries and maintains relations with Pakistan, while also maintaining contact with the Taliban government, even though it has not officially recognized their rule. Previously, Islamabad declared a state of open war following border clashes and carried out airstrikes on several Afghan cities, including the capital, Kabul. This move came after Afghan forces attacked Pakistani border soldiers on the evening of the 26th local time in response to earlier Pakistani airstrikes. Furthermore, experts have shared that the U.S. is also targeting networks behind fraudulent schemes related to this transnational scam operation. So according to our two experts, how is this situation affecting regional security? The interviewer asked. Expert Lou Van Vin responded, "It can be said that we must understand that crime, to some extent, will impact national security. That has always been undeniable. Including international crime, transnational crime, and now online fraud, all impact national security and require the efforts of all national levels in the fight against online fraud and international crime. We must understand that if countries cannot control the fight against online crime, it creates an opportunity for other countries to intervene, possibly even lead this effort. This is not unusual for the U.S. The U.S. often uses pressure, not just military, economic, or diplomatic pressure, but also pressure related to crime prevention. We know that in the past few decades, the U.S. has often had anti-drug missions in South America, working with countries to combat drug production and trafficking groups that supply the U.S. market. So if some countries cannot control online fraud and cybercrime, it's an opportunity for other countries, especially the U.S., to intervene. We must understand that this could be criminalized in diplomatic relations between countries, even if it's just because of groups that may hinder external activities. This has happened many times. There are cases where one country's laws impose severe penalties, while another's are lenient, and citizens who commit crimes are prosecuted, often affecting the relationship between the two countries. This is especially true in the fight against cybercrime. If countries fail to control it, it's an opportunity for the U.S. to get involved in combating cybercrime and online fraud, and gradually interfere in internal affairs. This cannot be ruled out. Therefore, countries must recognize this issue more clearly and take control of the fight against cybercrime and online fraud. If cooperation with other countries or the U.S. occurs, it should be based on information exchange and equality. But if you fail, if you are defeated by cybercrime and online fraud, it's an opportunity for the U.S. to step in. From a technological and scientific perspective, expert Dewey Trin added, consider drug prevention. We have an entire department dedicated to it. Drug abuse has been rampant for hundreds of years, and it still harms national security. Cybercrime is no different. We've seen the U.S. exploit the issue of drug trafficking to target President Maduro of Venezuela in what some experts say was just a cover to control Venezuela's oil reserves. Drawing a parallel, if you master science and technology, you can control the game and prevent the negative effects of technology. Those who exploit technology can attack a country. Cybersecurity is now at a critical level. Many find it convenient to use, but it can cause a few percentage points of GDP damage or shut down networks. These are non-traditional weapons. If we don't take preventative measures, if we don't research and develop technology to combat cybercrime, we'll fall behind. And when we fall behind, they'll exploit those technologies. For example, hackers can shut down networks or make them unusable, rendering a nation deaf and blind like a radar system down. Then other forces can attack. So if we look far ahead, cybercrime is a very dangerous threat to national security. We must now take preventative measures, create units, even form armies to fight, research, and develop response solutions. Because warfare may be unconventional, conflicts may be non-traditional. Indeed, the interviewer affirmed. In addition to the insights shared by the two experts, Thai authorities have discovered a new online fraud center in the Cambodian city of Malai. This facility is believed to be a new haven for criminal gangs fleeing the Thai-Cambodian border due to recent crackdowns. This situation shows that fraud is becoming increasingly serious and complex, and some experts even believe that it is impossible to completely eradicate online fraud, the interviewer added. Expert Lou Van Din shared his perspective. The information that new criminal groups have emerged in Cambodia's Bantay Meanchi province, as reported by Thailand, is quite normal. Why? Because when there are intense crackdowns in other locations, criminal groups shift to places with looser control, where they can continue to operate. As I analyzed, cybercrime and online fraud only require a mobile device, a satellite phone connection, an iPad, and a few staff to deploy. This demonstrates the flexibility, mobility, and easy dispersal of cybercrime, making the fight against it very difficult. The second thing is that crime still exists for the following reasons. First, profit. Like drugs, profit decides everything. Second, the use of high technology. And third, the gullibility and deception of some people who, because of high-paying job information, go to work there and ultimately become tools to defraud their own citizens. This is the reality of cybercrime that we and other countries have fought. As expert Dewey Trin analyzed, like drug crime, cybercrime will continue to exist. But our mission, the mission of countries, is to narrow it down and reduce the impact on the economy, society, and people. That is the important thing. We cannot let it disrupt society, disrupt the economy, or even the country. Because if we fail in the fight against cybercrime, it is a major loophole in national security that other forces can exploit. With the name of fighting crime, they can carry out many activities and criticize, punish, and take other measures. This has happened a lot, and we have learned a lesson not only in the past, but also in the years to come. These criminal groups can still exist and develop, especially in areas where sovereignty and competition between interest groups are developing. For example, in Myanmar, there is information that areas controlled by anti-government forces are places where cybercrime operates very strongly and control is very difficult. And that is the environment in which criminal groups exist. Once again, we believe that the determination of governments and authorities to fight cybercrime must be at the highest level.